My handouts while I get going. So I have a little handout for you to take away and put by your computer, so you know how to get back to the site that I want to tell you about. You know, Howard proves that the myth that your kids may have, that the Holocaust was long ago and far away, is just that. It's just a myth. It didn't happen long ago and far away. It happened to people who live in our neighborhood. And it could happen again. So one of the messages we wanted to get across when we built the resource I'll tell you about now was to make it real, to bring it home to Wisconsin. This morning, Jen told you about this fabulous curriculum, and the CDA has all those resources, the website has all those resources. But history becomes most real, especially to young people, when it's about them and their place. And our hope in putting this site that's on the screen now online was to enable teachers to bring the Holocaust home. Say, oh, there are people right here that it happened to. It's not as compelling as having a survivor in your classroom. But with, what did you say, Chris, 3,800 social studies classrooms in the state? Everybody can't bring a survivor to their classroom. With the site that I'll show you today, you can bring a good portion of it and some compelling stories. So let me tell you about this project, and then you can go back and explore it. First of all, has anybody been to this site? Would you raise your hand if you've been here? A few of you? Okay, so I won't assume very much. And I want to tell you where it came from. I know there's nothing more boring than watching somebody else navigate a website, so I'm not going to do that for very long to you. I want to tell you what the Historical Society, which is just across the street, by the way, if you've never been there, the Wisconsin Historical Society, what we set out to accomplish by digitizing these materials, how the original interviews were done, and then how the online collection works. I can't tell you how to use it in your classroom. I've never stood in front of 30 14-year-olds and tried to teach them. I mean, I have so much respect for those of you who do that for a living. I've parented teenagers, and that's hard enough. So I can't tell you how to use it in your classroom, but time permitting, maybe we can do a little hands-on thing where you can talk to each other, having seen what's there, but how you would use it. Also, many of the tools in Jen's curriculum package can be applied to the primary sources that I'll connect you with here. At the Wisconsin Historical Society, teachers are among our primary target audiences, and we always want to build resources that will help you. We decided when we wanted to put the interviews that we had done some years ago with survivors online, that we had three main goals. The first was to get these stories out there, because they had been rotting under that roof across the street, more or less. We decided we wanted to publish all of this audio, 160 hours of interviews, which come to more than 3,000 pages when they're typed out. And then selfishly, because digitizing kind of a new thing and digital librarianship is new, we wanted to learn how to do this. How do you bring sound and images and text all together into one site so that people can exploit it? We knew that we were aiming it at certain audiences. First are your students, or those of you who are in college now. We were aiming it at you and at your teachers. But then, does anybody know how many Americans go to college? What percentage of the adult population has gone to college? It's about 25%. Roughly the same number of Americans are functionally illiterate as go to college. They can't understand a newspaper article necessarily. So our job at the Historical Society is to reach everybody, not just that elite group at the top that happens to be well educated. So we wanted to point this collection and make it usable to people who were not academically trained. And at the same time, we wanted it to be available to people whose specialty is the history of the Holocaust. So we figured we'd fail at some of this, because this is really too much to do in one resource. Luckily, our worst fears haven't been confirmed. We knew we'd be successful if kids knew more, particularly about the Wisconsin connection. And we figured we'd be successful if these stories were out there in larger numbers, instead of just on little cassette tapes in Madison. Because lots of copies keep things safe, we figured if we made it all downloadable so you can just take it, it would preserve all of these stories too. And then, unlike most academic collections, we didn't want to just fill people's heads. We wanted to touch their hearts. And the experience we just had with Howard is exactly what we hope we can do on a smaller scale when people come to this website or when you play excerpts for your students. So that's where we started out. We could build this site because a generation ago, my predecessors at the Historical Society had a vision. This woman, who looks like, you know, the most conservative 1950s conventional person, was an archivist at the Society, Bobby Kaiser. And when the first Holocaust memoirs began to appear in the mid-1970s, she read them as they came out, and she was disappointed, mainly because those memoirs tended to focus only on people's lives between 1939 and 45. So it was like they had taken the Holocaust episode out of someone's life and turned it into a book. And she thought that really what makes a person who they are is their childhood and their family history and everything that led up to, in the case of the Holocaust survivors, what happened to them in the camps. Not only that, the people that we were going to talk to had emigrated to Wisconsin. So what was that like? I mean, what was it like to go through the things that Howard talked about in the late 40s and come here? What was it like to be the only Jew in a small Wisconsin town in 1968? You know, she wanted to ask about all of that and get everybody's whole life story and show their Holocaust experiences in that context. In 1974, she wrote some questions, tried it out on the woman shown sitting on the steps there, Pella Alpert, who lived in Green Bay, I believe. And then Bobby spent 3 years raising money and coming up with a list of people to interview. Historians think about 1,000 survivors settled in Wisconsin after the war. Bonnie, do you know if that's an accurate number? 1,000?
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe you guys have looked into it.
Yeah, Milwaukee had it, I think, about 400 in Milwaukee.
Okay, Bonnie says 400 came to Milwaukee. And as you'll see in a minute, the survivors actually went all over the state. It's not just a Milwaukee phenomenon. At the end of the 70s, we raised some money from the Wisconsin Humanities Committee, as you can see there, matched it with an equal amount of our own, raised some private money, and in 1979 hired a couple interviewers and a photographer. Sarah Leuchter, who is now Sarah Wilkins, still lives in the Milwaukee area. Is she connected with your organization at all? She was the prime, one of the two interviewers. I joined the Historical Society in 1982, right when this was wrapping up, so I wasn't there to see it underway, although I did know Sarah. So this is how the interviews were done. Looks pretty low tech, doesn't it? The clips that we saw this morning from Jen's collection are all more recent than this. At the time our interviews were done in 1979, 1980, there weren't any handheld video cameras. So these are audio recordings, and you can see the microphone perched on the couch there, Mrs. Epstein. Bobby, Kaiser, and Sarah and Jean selected 22 survivors quite consciously out of the hundreds whose contact information they had, and they included 2 American witnesses as well. The American witnesses, one was a liberator who came into one of the camps the day after the Germans left, and the other was a fellow who worked with a resettlement agency helping survivors get settled after the war, either in Europe or emigrate to this country. The survivors that they chose, they consciously chose 11 men and 11 women. And they tried to get the broadest range of economic class. So some of them had been wealthy and had servants when they were growing up. Others, like Howard, were from working class families. His dad, he said, worked in a shoe factory. And then a couple were completely impoverished during their childhoods. Religiously, you can see there they span the spectrum. There were very conservative Orthodox Jews, people who were conservative with a capital C, and people like Howard's father who really didn't think of themselves as religious. The questions that the interviewers came up with, and that you'll see on the site when you listen to the tapes or read the transcripts, cover everything about these people's lives. Their pre-war life and their childhood, what happened to them during the war, their immigration out of Europe and eventually to Wisconsin, their attitudes toward Jewish communities in Wisconsin. And I think that, I would think that if you're an older person, if you have grandparents who've been active in the Jewish community in Green Bay, I think they'd love to listen to these stories about people they used to know. And some of the questions focused on their attitude to the U.S., like one of you asked Howard, you know, what was it like to come here and what do you think of America today? As you can see from the map, they were pretty much all over the state. There's nobody over in the Mississippi Valley, but people all over the state, including up north, were interviewed and told their stories, and these are available to you. They came from all over Europe. Again, this was a conscious decision to try to get, even though there's only 22 interviews, try to get the most diversity they could. The person from Greece described a Jewish community that was completely obliterated. There is no community there anymore. And his account of what it was like to grow up there in the 20s is one of the best accounts of a thriving Jewish community in Greece. They went through, again, a broad range of experiences. Some of them were able to get out. The woman whose picture you just saw on the couch with the microphone was sent as a teenager. Her parents sent her in '38 to distant relatives in Chicago. Some hid underground, so if you teach the Diary of Anne Frank, you can have real-life examples to play from people from Wisconsin. One woman hid in Amsterdam, one guy hid in Amsterdam, another person spent the war as a teenager hiding in Berlin, right at the center of the Third Reich. Most of them passed through forced labor, and many of them, of course, extermination camps. There are the kind of horrifying accounts that we were just spared, I think, in large degree, that are told in great detail. Assuming technology will help us here, will work, I want to play you a snippet from an interview, the first of 3, with Herb de Levy, who was an architect in Madison. He grew up in outside Amsterdam. He came to Wisconsin after the war, went to high school here in Madison, and just next door at the Union, he bumped into Frank Lloyd Wright in 1951, and that persuaded him to become an architect. But when he was 7, the Nazis invaded his hometown, and they all hid in the same farmhouse for the next 4 years, his whole extended family. So let's see if the audio will kick in for us. Come on. Maybe I can click on it in this one. Yeah. Can you hear that at all?
Yeah, put the speaker right next to him.
It was a very small house. Everything she was there, everything happened with in the wish that somebody was there to stop the call.
Could you tell someone was there?
I think she had all faith. So, yeah, she called from the wish that night. They were for one day. She was not crying. She was crying. Yeah, so come on. She wasn't paying. She had so much cramp. Any kind of thing, don't feel or not, down or something.
Now, you could play that story for a 10-year-old, and they would get it. They've been asked not to cry. Herb de Levy, in that little account, talks about not being able to express his feelings, and one of the things in his interview that's really characteristic is the interviewers really press to try to get him to share anything emotional, because he's completely flat like that through the whole interview. Because for the 4 formative years of his childhood, emotions were not available. Okay, sorry. Bounce back. I don't know, I'm stuck here. Anybody good with PowerPoint? Here we go. So, months of interviewing over this 1979-80 produced 160 cassette tapes. People gave us their family photographs. In a few cases, they predated the war, but in most cases, their lives in Wisconsin. And then all sorts of artifacts and other things came in, like the shawl you see against the bottom of this collage. When the project was over, we thought it'd be a shame for those 160 cassette tapes just to sit in Madison, and so we published this book, which has a short biography of each person, and in the back of it has, on microfiche, an index to everything talked about in the interview. It also has time points so that you could see in each interview what was under discussion. But still, back then, 30 years ago, people had to come to Madison to play these tapes. So we weren't real happy about that. 10 years later, we got the idea to take their Holocaust episodes from their lives and put them into a book. So this book, which you may have seen, is all Wisconsin residents' experience of the Holocaust, but it just pulls out of context their life in the camps. So it didn't do, again, what everybody hoped the collection could do. It also didn't sell very well, not very interesting. I'm sure you could get one if you want one today. So a couple of years ago, we said the web has turned the world upside down, and my job across the street is to try to digitize collections and put them on the web. And we said, why don't we just put all of it on the web? Just convert it all to digital. And now that seems like nothing, because you buy a computer, they give you a free scanner at Best Buy. But at the time that we began this work, it was novel. So we said, let's put all the 160 cassettes, over 300 hours of interviews, get them all typed, put them up on the web so you can see them. And that's what's there for you today if you take that blue card home with you. Here's how it works, and this is where I said I promise I won't bore you, but you should know a couple of things. The homepage is reproduced on the front of the card. You navigate through those tabs at the top. The search tab might be useful for you to find individual stories, because we tagged those transcripts in great detail, so you can jump in anywhere you need to. The testimonies page is one page per person, and you'll get a biography of the person. Doesn't this guy look incredibly dashing there in his jacket in 1946? That's what aging does to you. You get a biography, story of what happened to them. You get a list of all the tapes. And from that page, you can either play the audio, which is 30 minutes per tape, like a cassette. How many of you remember cassettes? All right, we're not quite entirely MP3 yet. Or you can download the tape. And this is your guide to what's on each tape. And then down at the bottom, a little more detail and links to pictures of the person, if there are any. The transcripts look like this. They're in PDF form, so you can just right-click and save them, do anything you like with them. They're searchable. As you can see from that first line, it was a Hitler Jugendcamp. There's a footnote. We tried to footnote terms so that you can use them. I don't think you could turn a 12-year-old loose on these, but if you teach high school, you could certainly do that. High school kids could find their way around in them. And then, because we know that those of you who teach barely get time to sleep, we pulled onto an excerpts page a few dozen excerpts out of the interview. So you get audio and you get a transcript of it, like the one that I just played. And you can see on the right there the categories that they fall into. So if you wanted to use Jen's curriculum in her 10 chapters, I think you'll find that most of them overlap pretty closely here. You could certainly turn kids loose and say, find accounts of anti-Semitism in Europe. But you could also say, find me an account of anti-Semitism in Wisconsin, and write about that. The search page allows you to combine all sorts of tagged fields so that you can pull back whatever you want. And then finally, there are several hundred, I think about 600 pictures altogether available to you. And it's all available 24/7. Just right-click, take anything you want, use it in your classroom. We made a teacher's page, which now looks kind of inadequate to me after this morning. I think that although it has some guidance on the left there for resources in our site that might be useful for different grade levels, most of the online resources that we click to are probably superseded by what you were just given for free. But we have tried to make it easy for you. On every page, there's a feedback link or a contact us link. It goes right to my email box. Okay, so I'm going to get it on my phone, and you can say, I was at the Pyle Center last month, and this doesn't work. Help me out. So here's a couple things I've done when I've done teachers' workshops when there was more than half an hour of time that we could look at right now. How would you, could you ask your kids to do this? Could you turn them loose on a website and answer these two questions? How many of you who teach middle school, is there anybody who teaches middle school? Do you just send your kids loose to the web at home? Yeah. Okay, so I think you should know if you send them here, you may get calls from parents because they're in tears reading the details of things that their parents maybe didn't know you were going to bring up, because they'll get some very moving stories. But you can certainly ask them, so who lived close to my school? Who lived in my county? Let's hear their story. Let's listen to another story by one of the survivors. This is Shauna Cummins, who lived here in Madison. She was about the age of some of your, if you teach high school, seniors. She was in her late teens and a new mother when the Nazis arrived in her town in 1941. She escaped being liquidated then and was sent to work in forced labor and survived with her baby when everybody at that camp were taken out to be shot. And in this, well, before we get there, after the war, she ended up in Madison. She lived on Baldwin Street, which you'll drive by as you go back to the highway, and she worked in a little diner near the Oscar Mayer plant on the east side for her whole career, while her husband worked at Oscar Mayer. Here she's going to tell how she and her baby escaped. Come on.
And I wasn't at wedding with a lot of people, and you couldn't even ask, but I asked one instructor. I said, before I know where I'm going, you can't fool me, but can I at least have a cup of water? It was a little farmhouse. And I asked him if I can go in. I said, even you have a heart. You can go, can I go in and have a drink of water? And he said no, but then another instructor said, what can you do? Better go and have a drink of water. And he let me. I went into the little farmhouse. Nobody was there. And it was a window just enough to crawl out of that window. And I got some water, and it was kind of high, that window, and I broke the window with my tailbone. I cut myself with the ground, was bleeding, and I threw Sally out, and jumped out the window, and I escaped to the woods. And when I escaped, they started shooting, but they never get me. A lot of people escaped that day to the woods. And I went to woods I'd never been before. I didn't know where I am. And Sally was lucky, but Sally was a very good baby. She never cried. And then I escaped, and it was morning, and I didn't know where I am. But I could see it was around 4 o'clock. It was still light. And I could hear the machine gun. And I could see some of it from the woods, how the people, they took all the clothes off and they shot them and they just fell in and the dishes that the district we used to work on it.
So that's one that, you know, if you send your 12-year-olds to, you're probably going to get repercussions from. There are dozens of stories like that available to you. The point I would make with kids about this is that the woman who serves you your scrambled eggs at the pancake house might be this woman. This is all around us. Come on. Oh, thank you very much. So the site's been up for a couple of years. It sees 100 to 200 users a day at the moment. And some of the feedback we got, I thought I would share with you. You can read as well as I can, so I'll read it out loud to you. Or, can you see it? Oh. Chana Cummins' story about her life in a labor camp with her newborn baby leaves me speechless. I can't help crying while I listen to this woman's testimony. What an excellent source for bringing history alive. The site should be used in every classroom studying the Holocaust. To hear the survivors describe their experiences was very moving. What an amazing digital project. I'm having a hard time finding words to actually discuss this. It hurts my heart to the core. Those were UW students. We didn't anticipate this, but of course these are Wisconsin people, and so their kids and their grandkids are here. And they end up finding the site by Googling their parents' or their grandparents' names. Reading about my mother brought tears to my eyes. I'm so very proud of her and your project. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for keeping her story alive and for giving her the ability to tell her story long after her death. It means so much to me and my family. We'll be forever grateful. I want to thank you so much for giving me the ability to hear my grandma's story, now that I'm old enough and interested enough to hear it. To hear her voice 12 years after her death brings her back to me and helps me understand the horrific life she withstood. Thank you so very much for this. To me and my family, it's priceless. Now, the site compares to better known sites. It has some unique features that are worth pointing out to you. The more popular sites, like the main museum sites, will often include far more than 22 survivors' testimony. But generally, they'll give you only brief excerpts, and they'll only focus on their Holocaust experiences. They often include video, because they're newer than these interviews. But they function like museum exhibits, where you get little snippets out of context. I think the thing that you'll find here, if you want to exploit it, is that you get everything, the complete audio and the texts. It's all tagged so you can search across it, and it's people from your own area, your students' own area. It focuses on their whole life, as I said before, and gives you their biographical background. I think we could take a couple minutes here. What could you do with it? Turn to the person next to you, especially if you teach these popular things. How would you bring Wisconsin into these units? Oh God, you say, he's making me talk again.
Okay. Oh, you don't. Oh, okay. She's actually in my class.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you. I'm not totally myself right now. So. Okay, good enough. Take care of
Okay, what do you think? Is there a way to tie Wisconsin into everything you heard about before today? Anybody have a good idea? Thank you, Ben.
Well, one thing that we talked about that I thought was a really interesting idea was that we could even use this for the topic, not just the Holocaust or even Wisconsin history, but we could use it to discuss like the idea of immigration and adjusting to life in a new country, that kind of a thing.
Right, you could. Yeah. The kind of pyramid of hate that we talked about this morning, there's an awful lot in here about discrimination in Wisconsin. Thank you. Way in the back.
Well, just like there's, it's hard to grasp the number of people who were affected by this, by the Holocaust, to be able to have the kids, like to give them a local perspective on it, that they can somehow begin to realize that this is not just, a European event that happened. This is something that involved the entire world, and yes, it did affect even people here in the great state of Wisconsin, in the Midwest. So, and if they can, and maybe they can personally, maybe they'll realize, oh my gosh, I know someone who lives in Wausau, Wisconsin, or I've been to Oshkosh, or whatever the case might be, that they can have a little bit more of a connection on that level too.
That's certainly our hope.
Right.
That will make it easy for you to do that. Anybody teach Anne Frank? in your class? Okay. There's the woman on the card who's second from the right, the smiling blonde woman named Flora Bader, B-A-D-E-R. She's the person who hid out in Amsterdam through the war as a teenager. And reading her interview, you know, I just want to send it to Hollywood. It is the most exciting story ever, and it's parallel. It parallels Anne Frank's in many ways, except she doesn't get caught and go off to the camp, but her life underground is there. So I'll give you that as a heads up. Okay. I want to share one more. Oh, sorry.
Well, I just want. Do you know if any of the survivors that are on tape are still living?
The question from Bonnie is, are any of the survivors still living? Yes, some of them are still alive, and some have passed away. A bunch passed away in the last 2 or 3 years, just as we did this. A few in the Milwaukee area. You probably would know who they are if you go look at the names. Yeah, but most of them are very ancient. You know, they were not, like Howard was 10 years old when this happened. Most of these folks were 5 or 6 years older than that. I want to end with this story by Selah Sundell, who came to Milwaukee in 1949 with her kids and her husband. She had escaped being massacred on the day the Germans invaded her town. And she tells in this excerpt what happened after it was all over, and she got to Milwaukee, and she sends her daughter off to kindergarten.
She was there. The teacher asked if she played her hands with her hand on the phone for every child raised their hand, but she couldn't do it. When she came home, she cried everyone. I asked her, "Are any families what happened?" And she said, "Mama, everybody raised their hand." And that is my son, and I told her one thing. And I didn't raise them. She knew it was her best friend. And she tried to raise them, then I laid them down her. She was Welsh, very nice people. She had asked question, she said, "What happened? Why is Lord, I gave everything to her. I used to always cry, and I told her, you know, they asked this too." And she couldn't answer this. She couldn't raise her hand. And then I said, she said, "From now on, don't try. How do you learn?" And the very first people who were trying to do. And called me nine, and Welsh grandmother was nine. Called me nine and grandmother. And she said, "When you do my good boy, that can you say?"
That one still makes me want to cry after all these years of hearing it. Yes.
Can you summarize it a little bit?
You could not hear it. Sorry, you should have jumped up and down.
Well, they're coming through just a little bit muffled too.
You,
So if
you can't read because that's too small. Here we go. The first time when she went to kindergarten, she was there, and the teacher asked they should raise their hands who had an aunt, uncle, grandpa, grandmother. Every child could raise their hands, and she couldn't do it. She came home, she cried very much. And I asked her, "Why are you crying? What happened?" And she said, "Mama, everybody raised their hands. Where is my grandma and grandpa and my uncle and aunts?" And I couldn't raise it. And she knew that I don't have nobody, and she cried terrible. And then I had a lady live up downstairs. She was Welsh, very nice people. And she ran upstairs and she said, "What happened? Why is Gloria," they gave her a nickname, Gloria, "why is Gloria crying?" And I told her, "You know, they asked at school," and she couldn't answer this. She couldn't raise her hand. And this was a Gentile woman, and she told, "From now on, don't cry. I'll be your grandma, and grandpa will be your grandpa too. And call me Nine," in Welsh, grandma, that means 9. "Call me Nine, and grandpa, and you'll be my granddaughter to me," she said. Again, one that would resonate with kids of any age. Yeah, I see tears in the back. The point, part of the point, is to touch their hearts. Sorry. We would like you to exploit this as much as you can and make that connection that the teacher in the back said. Make your kids realize that this history is about them and they're part of history. You'll find in the excerpts tab on that page about 30 or 40 stories like the 3 that you heard this afternoon. You can find others inside if you want to search for them, for specific to your area. That's all I have. If you have questions, fire away, or we can just move on to Angie and get back on schedule. I'll take that as a vote for you. Thank you.
Let's take a quick stretch break so Angie can get her stuff together, and then we will, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the folders, a little bit about the feedback, and then we will roll on. Michael?
Yeah.
Find your... Okay, cool.
Still in the comments?
We're still taping.